Thanks very much for that report. Let's bring in Congressman John Garamendi. He's a leading Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, before we talk about Iran, what's going on with those sailors, you worked in Africa. You helped negotiate peace treaties in Ethiopia, Eritrea, the Congo. Explain the influence of this terror group, these various terror groups in Africa right now. You see what's going on in Burkina Faso. Terrorists apparently have stormed the splendid hotel there in Ouagadougou, the capital, and there are French-American troops maybe getting ready to move in. First of all, what are you hearing?
Well, all that you've heard thus far, but it's not a surprise. We do know that throughout that entire area, the entire Sahel area, that is the southern portion of the Great Desert in that region, these terrorist groups operate. We've seen in northern Nigeria, obviously Mali, all the way across to the west as well as to the east, Somalia. And so this entire area is littered with these various terrorist groups. They are dangerous and they are very, very aggressive. Fortunately, the United States government, working with the French government as well as the local governments in the area, is pushing back very, very strongly. And we must also carry out the economic and social development upon which a lot of this terrorism is able to breed and grow.
A lot of Americans probably will be surprised, Congressman, that there are American troops there on the scene together with French troops ready to come to the assistance of the government and maybe storm this hotel where hostages are being held and terrorists may be inside. Are you surprised there are U.S. troops there?
No, not at all. We've known that for some time. If you'll recall, there was this thing called Ebola. It was the United States military that provided the relief in that same region. And we have had troops in that area. We also provide a lot of what we call intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance using our high-altitude aerial platforms of various kinds so that we can identify and help. We are major with the French, who provide most of the ground operations in that area, but we also provide transportation, logistics, and the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. And we do it all across that region. AFRICOM, which operates in that area, AFRICOM being the military command responsible for Africa, is active. We don't have a lot of troops, but we do have some in various places, including some fast response operations. Perhaps that is what is taking place there in that hotel situation.
And now we know there are some American troops in Burkina Faso as well. All right, Congressman, stand by. There's a lot more to discuss, including the way Iran treated those 10 U.S. sailors. We'll have a lot more with Congressman John Garamendi when we come back. Vast wealth. Let's bring in our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, you were the first to report on this strike, and now we see the video. Explain to our viewers what happened.
Exclusive video to CNN of this U.S. airstrike. Two 2,000-pound bombs dropping in the middle of Mosul, Iraq, Iraq's second largest city, on an ISIS cash depot. Millions in ISIS cash destroyed. But look at this video very carefully. You see a huge flutter of paper. For some reason, perhaps the direction of the blast, there was a flutter of cash that sprung up into the air. The military found that pretty fascinating. They're not really sure why it all didn't get incinerated, but the CENTCOM commander, General Lloyd Austin, told reporters this really was a good hit. They got the bulk of the ISIS cash depot. This is money that ISIS uses to pay its troops, to finance its operations. These are the kinds of economic and financial targets that the coalition is trying to hit to take ISIS's ability to finance those operations away from the organization. Wolf?
All right, Barbara, thanks very much. Very dramatic video indeed. Congressman Garamendi is still with us. Congressman, the strike against this ISIS financial center in Mosul, clearly a blow to their operations, and you see all that cash blowing up right there. The criticism is, though, that civilian casualties occurred, that even in the process of trying to destroy all this money, there were civilian casualties. Are you okay with that?
I don't think there's any choice but to go after ISIS in a very, very formidable and aggressive manner. And yes, there will be civilian casualties, but we must keep in mind that the U.S. military, unlike the Russian military, is doing everything it possibly can to minimize those. We use almost always smart bombs, which we probably used in this situation, so as to not miss the target. But these things do happen. But we also recognize that This is one dangerous terrorist group, and we need to be very aggressive. We need to do the very best we can to target only the fighters, but there is going to be collateral damage, which means civilian casualties, and that's just unfortunate.
As you heard from Jim Sciutto, the Iran nuclear deal could go into effect as early as this weekend, and initially U.S. officials say $30 to $50 billion in frozen assets will be unfrozen. The money will quickly get into the hands of the Iranians. Is there any way to track that money to make sure it doesn't go to terror groups, if you will, out there? Because the U.S. government, as you know, still considers Iran to be a state sponsor of terrorism.
Well, yes, there could be, but we're looking at a situation in which Iran has some serious problems at home. And my guess is they're going to have to spend a lot of that money on the infrastructure in the oil industry so that they can move their oil out of their country. And right now, with the price of oil tanking, they're not going to be in a very wealthy situation. One thing we as Americans need to keep in mind, and that is the other side of this equation. Most of what I've heard in your reporting thus far is about the lifting of the sanctions and the effect that that will have, including the cash. The other side of this is that Iran's nuclear potential is seriously degraded, at least for the next decade and quite possibly for the next 25 years. Their centrifuges, 19,000. They've had to give up 14,000 of those centrifuges. Their highly enriched uranium has been shipped out of the country, and their the reactor that could produce plutonium is now filled with concrete. And so we have avoided a North Korea situation in the Iran country. So this is good news. The sanctions are not all lifted. Only the sanctions having to do with the nuclear issue are lifted. All of the sanctions that have to do with the bad acting, including where that money might go, those sanctions stay in place.
Congressman John Garamendi, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just ahead, Democrats find some rare reason to agree with Donald Trump after he fired back at Ted Cruz for his attack on so-called New York values. Trump citing 9/11 and a very strong defense of his turf.